Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
Joel, what is the limit of the pagination in Laravel? Well, the default pagination,
I didn't
like
know
per
this was going to be a
page.
quiz. 10.
Yeah, 10 or 15 or something. I don't know. I
Okay.
think it I think it's 15, but it feels like it should be 10. But the
Yeah, I
point
have 10
is,
fingers. So,
yeah. So I guess, that makes sense. So pagination, it has a limit. We can go through our pages. Why do you think, why do we even have pagination as like a pattern? Like, what are some of the reasons why we use that?
well, I mean, I think for me, the number one reason that comes to mind is performance, right? Like, I'm thinking of a large data set. Maybe you have 150,000 rows. Like, that would bog the system down. That's one.
Right. Yeah. And then you have a user interface and all these
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought up the performance one because that
Okay.
was the one I was going to focus on real quick.
Good.
So I guess I'm gonna try to interpret what you said, and make an
That is your
assumption.
job. You're the Joel translator.
And you correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so
Okay.
you're saying that pagination is helpful because we can put a limit on the results maybe that we retrieve, and so for performance, we either over the wire transmitting it or the query, like limiting the amount of information we retrieve or
Yeah.
how much of a query we have to do. That's the thing you're referring to when you say performance, right? Like
Yeah.
something to do with
Yeah.
that.
You're right. Yeah. You're hinting at there's a couple different layers to it. In my
Right.
mind, I'll admit I was actually thinking of the time it would take to run the query. So
Okay.
if it's a row, for example, that's not just a straight select, it's a select with a join that filters this and has a relationship existence check and like all that stuff where yeah, if you're doing it on 10 records, it's instant. But if you run that across the whole database, all of a sudden it's really slow, or you're sorting or you're filtering, like those sorts of things.
Now I know I haven't been telling you kind of where this podcast topic's going to go, and I know that it
I
kind of feels like a trap,
Yeah.
but you fell into it perfectly.
Oh, come on.
No, so this idea that we can use pagination to sort of limit the intent, like the workload, the
Yeah.
intensity of the query, all these different things.
Mhm.
So then my question is, what's the limit for the high level of the per page?
Ooh. Well,
Because it sounds like that's kind of built into this assumption. It's like, hey, there's pagination, so there must be a limit, and because of that limit, we have less workload. So there must be a default. But what if someone understands that that's the reason why you're doing pagination
yeah,
and is a little evil and wants to raise that limit up? What's the Laravel limit on how high it can go?
I don't think there is one.
Exactly. I don't think there is either. And so
Okay.
that's kind of what I wanted to talk about
Yeah.
today, which was, we talk a lot about validation and testing and stuff, but there's other places you can do validation that aren't necessarily a sort of area that you think about, but is somewhere that needs to be covered. And one of
Right.
those is actually GET requests. And that's not something you really think about when you think about form validation or
Yeah.
stuff like that. But you are doing something based off user input, and that user input should be validated and appropriately relevant to your application.
I 100% agree. And I could say, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever joined a project that validated the pagination size, right? Like I've never seen it done other than us doing it. It's just one aside, just to make sure, like we're not being critical of Laravel, because like I don't think, like, do you think there is a sane upper limit that it could impose that would actually make sense across all applications? Like it feels kind of hard.
Well, yeah, I think that's one of those things where it's like, well,
Yeah.
until there's a problem, we don't necessarily put something in there. So it's not
Right.
necessarily criticism, but it is
Yeah.
something that like you should understand the tool that you're using.
Yep. Agreed.
And this is one of those things again where like we say there's a lot of cool functionality inside of Laravel, but people can abuse it. So like for example, fillable or guarded on your eloquence, don't just put a star in there. Like stop that. But you could, and I'm glad
Sure.
that Laravel gives you the ability to do that, but
Yeah.
don't do that, you know. And so it's same sort of concept here, I think.
I agree. Yeah.
So what we do in situations like this is we need to make sure that we have some sort of validation to make sure if we're kind of, I guess there's two reasons. One, if we're even depending on pagination to be our sort of safety valve for our performance issues.
Yeah.
And two, like I said, when it comes to user input, we should always be validating it anyway, because I just don't know all the things that can happen. If I expect from a user that it should be a number or nothing, and that number should be between these values, that's the only thing I ever want to have from them, because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And here's a great thing. Here's where being a salty, seasoned professional helps me. Is back in the day, we didn't even think about UTF-8 that much. And so you would have, Windows type character sets and things like that. And
Sure.
people would send in UTF-8 or an emoji or something like that, and it would just bork everything up.
That's
And so
right.
you're like,
Yeah.
well, I didn't even think about that.
Right.
But so when you're thinking about validation, like you don't know what's going to come down in the future. Maybe, there's a bug in a browser that always, for whatever reason, Chrome puts out a bug that says per page equals 1,000. What would that do to your app? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
hope it
mean,
would stop it, versus like just take it all down.
yeah, like you mentioned, could be a bug, could be somebody malicious, could be somebody just messing around. And I thought even related to this, let's say you have zero performance issues, right? So say maybe your database has a million rows and you could load them all and it would still come back in like 200 milliseconds. There's also like, I don't know if data privacy is the right word, but like, do you really want to give somebody like a whole dump of a table? Like, or maybe you want to at least make it a little harder for them to scrape your site and pull all that data out. There's all these good reasons to enforce it, but yeah, I think GET requests in general, I rarely see validation done on them, but this is just one specific example where I think it's super important.
So how we might do that is usually on our, if we're doing like a resourceful controller or something like
Hmm.
that, you have your index method.
Yep.
So we might make like an index form request. So you have your store and your update form requests that you might use for validation. We'll make one for our get request too, and in there that'll actually it'll define rules which get processed automatically, because Laravel is like, I don't care
Hmm.
what method you're using, I'm going to process this form validation.
Right.
So you can put in stuff like the page, how the page, the upper limits for your page and the per page. And I like to put some just little sanity levels on there as well, as I don't let negative numbers come in, because
Sure.
I it's not a useful thing to have happen, and I don't know what would happen. I mean, I know what
Yeah.
will happen. Nothing bad will happen, but I don't always know that, right?
Sure.
And so we put that validation on there. There's one small caveat that I'll mention now, that has bit me a couple times.
Oh,
And this is one of those things where it's like, I don't care if something goes wrong for someone who's abusing my site,
yeah.
except for maybe I do a little bit.
Okay.
And then especially if it's for me, when I'm
Oh,
trying to, develop it and it goes wrong and I can't figure it out. And so when those form requests fail their validation, the Laravel validation will try to go to the previous page. So if you're going
yes.
to this page,
Yep.
it'll just go into some sort of loop, and that could be a problem. So you can customize that on that form request on like where I want to go. And so you would just kind of tell it to go to itself again without any get requests.
Okay, yeah, and that's mainly an issue if you are validating a GET request, because like a post, the where you're coming from is where you'd want to go back to, but with a GET, maybe not, right? So
Yeah, yeah. With a post, you're posting from somewhere. You're
yeah,
you're really never coming from nowhere.
yeah,
Or if you are, there's like an intended route then.
that's a good subtlety. I'm glad you brought that up. Just I want to comment one more thing. Like you mentioned negative numbers, like nothing bad
Mhm.
happens if somebody says page size or page number -1. Well, nothing bad happens right now. Again,
Right.
maybe Laravel's handling that for us now, but maybe down the road there's a bug there. I don't know what it would be, but this concept of like stopping bad data at the edges of your app is just like a good general principle. So like, why wouldn't you? Like, even if it doesn't actually matter right now, it might matter in the future. It's easy to do. And it just structurally documents what you're expecting if somebody looks at that code later. So I think there's all sorts of good reasons.
The easiest way for a chicken to give birth is with a C-section.
What on earth are you talking about?
I know, right? Isn't that just a weird sentence? There's something weird about that. Like there's so many things wrong with that.
The chickens
Okay.
don't give birth. That's like you
I know,
lost me immediately.
I know
Okay.
exactly. So the reason I bring this up is because I'm really kind of getting nervous about what's happening with AI. And I'm not going to be like an old scary man here, but remember Google bombing
I do.
when we used to do that, or
Yeah.
some people used to do that.
I never
You
did.
would go, you would go and you develop a term or something, and you could go and seed that over everything.
Yeah.
And then when people would search that term, it would look like that was a natural response to that. And that was
Right.
the bomb. And Google is like, you said a weird term and then it now responds to that. And some people
That's
did that
right.
for famous people for a while
Mhm.
until Google was able to fix that. Now, that's kind of my concern with this generative AI stuff now that we're seeing too, is it's a bit smarter than that. But what if people that want to mess with it are just smarter too?
Sure.
And so I crafted that sentence specifically
Ooh.
because I wanted to mess with AI. And so I wonder if it's because follow me through, because I'm thinking about how AI works, right?
Yeah.
Generative, it doesn't know, but it starts to build patterns. And so
Yeah.
when you start to mess with the patterns, maybe you can convince it something else. So, all right, it knows what a chicken is. All right. Easiest way for a chicken is to give birth. What? Chickens don't give birth. So already AI spinning out of control like you are. This is false information. I'm going to start to throw this out. But then I continue. I'm like, no, it's to give birth is a C-section. And so I'm reinforcing that I'm doubling down on that they can give birth.
It's
And pretty soon it's like, well, I guess this is a good pattern, because if it was a bad pattern, this human detail would have just given up by now. So I'm training that AI now that it's going to have this weird sort of thought process in its head.
yeah.
Before you know it, when we start asking for eggs, it's going to give all kinds of weird suggestions in the grocery store. You're welcome. You seem to know a lot about validation. Like you were even sort of almost wanting to talk over me because you knew so much about form requests. Why is that?
Oh, I get so excited. We wrote a book on it, Aaron. And so if you listen to this and you liked our takes on validation, head to masteringlaravel.io, click on validation, and check out that book.